it feels like, wow, every week there's like a dozen new AI models popping up, and
Right.
you send us these comparison reports and all these YouTube discussions, and I really appreciate that. But
Yeah.
it's still kind of hard to keep track of everything and really figure out what's actually important here.
Absolutely. And the pace is just relentless, right?
Yeah.
So trying to stay on top of all of that and figure out what each new development actually means for people can be a job in itself.
Exactly. And so that's why we're here. We've gone through all those sources you shared, the big comparison report, and then those YouTube conversations, and we're gonna unpack it for you. And we
Mm.
just want to cut through the noise and highlight the key takeaways about these frontier AI models, so you can really get a clear picture of what's going on.
Think of it as us doing the heavy lifting for you, right?
Right.
Sifting through all the technical details and trying to figure out what people are actually experiencing with these things so we can bring you the insights that actually matter.
Right. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore which models are, leading the charge when it comes to coding.
Yeah,
And yes, Claude 3.7 Sonnet seems to get a lot of buzz there.
definitely.
But we'll also look beyond code
Uh-huh.
at, the creative potential some of these models are showing, which is pretty surprising.
Yeah, and we should also look at how well these systems integrate with other tools, right through this thing called function calling, which is essential for building real-world applications.
Right.
It can't just be this isolated thing.
Yeah, and of course we can't ignore good old-fashioned intelligence. How well do these models handle complex reasoning and general knowledge?
Right, the basic.
And we'll even, peek under the hood a little bit, look at some of the underlying technology,
Yeah,
things like context link. Basically, how much information can they juggle at once?
right.
And we'll also touch on, where you're actually seeing these models pop up in everyday use.
Yeah, and expect some interesting comparisons along the way, and maybe a few things that you didn't expect.
Right. So where should we start?
Well, I mean, given how much interest there is in these coding capabilities, especially around Claude 3.7 Sonnet,
Yeah.
that seems like a logical place to begin.
Okay, let's dive into the coding question.
Yeah.
The report really does highlight Claude 3.7 Sonnet as a top performer.
Hmm.
I mean, it scores on these coding benchmarks like SWE-bench verified,
Right.
which, by the way, throws real-world software bugs at the AI
Oh, wow.
to see if it can fix them,
Yeah.
are really impressive. I mean, it's hitting over 62% accuracy,
Wow.
and even higher in some scenarios,
Yeah.
which puts it ahead of a lot of the competition.
Yeah.
So for someone out there who's, looking to automate some of their code generation or tackle these really complex programming tasks, what does that kind of performance actually translate to?
So what I think is fascinating here is it's not just about these abstract test scores.
Right.
The report actually gives some really concrete examples of companies like Canva, Replit, Vercel, who are using Claude 3.7 Sonnet for significant coding projects.
Wow.
Things like full-stack updates and working with complex software architectures.
Yeah.
So that real-world validation, I think, tells you a lot more than just a benchmark on its own.
Absolutely. It's one thing to pass a test. It's another thing to handle, the often messy reality of, production level code.
Yeah.
But the report also makes it clear that Claude 3.7 isn't the only, capable coder out there.
Sure.
I mean, OpenAI's O3 Mini, for instance, still showed strong results on SWE-bench.
Yeah.
And DeepSeek V3 apparently aced this other benchmark called Human Evil.
Oh, interesting.
So, depending on the specific nature of your coding needs,
Right.
there might be different models that shine.
And that kind of raises the question of what are the kinds of coding challenges that you're most interested in, right?
Right.
Because DeepSeek V3 is strong performance on Human Evil, which is really focused on generating correct code from scratch.
Yeah.
Based on a description, suggests that it might be particularly good at that,
Uh-huh.
whereas Claude 3.7 Sonnet seems to do really well in these more complex real-world situations,
Yeah.
like debugging or refactoring code that already exists.
Right, and it's interesting to see that even within the Claude family, you've got models like Claude 3.5 Haiku and the upgraded Claude 3.5 Sonnet that are also showing strong coding abilities.
Yeah, it's amazing how competitive this area has become.
It really is. So if you're in the market for an AI coding assistant, it sounds like you've got some excellent options.
You do.
With Claude 3.7 Sonnet currently looking like the leader in handling those more complex tasks,
Uh-huh.
but certainly not the only game in town.
The report really emphasizes that it depends on which benchmarks you value most. or
Yeah.
the very specific things that you need to do with code.
Yeah. Okay, so coding is clearly a major area where these models are proving their worth.
Yeah.
But what about, their potential for creativity in
Uh-huh.
areas beyond just writing code?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because while Claude 3.7 Sonnet is known for its strong logical reasoning,
Mm-hmm.
the report actually suggests that other models might be better when it comes to different forms of creativity.
Interesting.
So, for example, OpenAI's GPT-0 is highlighted for doing really well with non-English languages and processing visual information.
Right.
So that kind of hints that it has a broader set of creative tools at its disposal.
That makes a lot of sense. If a model can understand and work with different types of input,
Right.
like images or, multiple languages, you
Right.
kind of expect that to open up possibilities for more diverse and, innovative outputs.
Yeah, for sure.
And the original GPT-4 also gets a mention for
Yeah.
its enhanced creative abilities.
Uh-huh.
So if your creative projects involve visuals or multilingual content, those might be worth checking out.
Absolutely.
But, the report also injects a little bit of caution here. It
Yeah.
points out that even these advanced models like GPT-4o can still struggle to consistently produce high-quality creative work.
Yeah, and Grok 3 is mentioned for its really sophisticated reasoning that extends into creative areas like data design,
Oh, wow.
which is fascinating because that requires not just artistic flair, but also really logical thinking about rules, player experience, narrative structure.
Game design, that's a great example of how creative isn't just one thing.
Right.
It involves logic, problem solving, understanding user interaction,
Yeah.
all within a creative context.
Uh-huh.
So if you're thinking about AI for creative endeavors, think about the type of creativity that you're aiming for.
Exactly. And the report does a good job of highlighting that while strong reasoning skills,
Right.
like what we see with Claude 3.7 Sonnet, might be important for certain types of creative output.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be great at everything.
Right.
Creativity in writing code might use very different cognitive skills than, say, creative writing or the visual arts.
So the key takeaway here is that if your focus is on creative project beyond code models like GPT-4o or Grok 3, might be interesting to explore,
Yeah,
but it's also important to remember that even the most advanced AI has its limitations.
right.
And, strong reasoning doesn't automatically equal artistic brilliance across the board.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're asking it to do.
Okay, so we've talked about coding.
Yeah.
We've talked about different flavors of creativity.
Uh-huh.
Now let's think about how these AI brains interact with the rest of our digital tools and systems.
Right.
I'm talking about compatibility and this thing called function calling.
This is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of practical applications.
Right.
Function calling basically allows the AI model to interact with external systems and tools
Yeah,
so you can automate workflows.
right.
And Google's Gemma 3 is specifically built for this.
Oh, wow.
It offers really broad compatibility with all these popular AI development libraries,
Yeah.
which could be a huge advantage for developers.
That sounds incredibly useful for, anyone who's building applications with AI. Being able to seamlessly integrate an AI into your existing projects without a ton of complex workarounds.
Right.
That's a huge benefit.
It is.
And the report mentions GPT-4o offering structured outputs
Uh-huh.
and even the ability to make multiple function calls in parallel.
Yeah, it can do a lot.
That sounds pretty sophisticated.
It is, but the report is careful to point out that even the most advanced function calling agents,
Right.
including GPT-4o, aren't perfect.
Yeah.
They don't always succeed, and they can sometimes be inconsistent.
Uh-huh.
So while the potential's there for automation, it's not like 100% seamless yet.
So it's promising, but not quite plug-and-play perfection just yet.
Yeah.
The report also notes that OpenAI O3 Mini and the Claude family are showing improvements in this area
Yeah.
with, better adherence to instructions and more accurate use of tools.
Yeah.
And even Google's Gemini 2.0 is getting more involved in the function calling space.
Right, so everyone's kind of realizing how important this is.
Yeah, it seems like most of the major players recognize how important this is
Right.
for real-world utility.
It's got to work with the things that are out there.
Right. And it's interesting that even Claude 3.7 Sonnet,
Yeah.
while it's not explicitly called out for function, calling in the report's, main comparison table,
Uh-huh.
It has been shown in other contexts to work with external APIs like the OpenAI API,
Right.
which suggests that it has some level of compatibility there.
Yeah.
And its strong performance on Talbench, which evaluates how well an AI can use tools to achieve a goal, also kind of points in that direction.
Interesting.
So it looks like the ability for these models to really integrate and automate tasks
Right.
is a growing area of focus,
Uh-huh.
with models like Gemma 3, GPT-4o3 Mini kind of at the forefront.
Yeah.
But it's still, a developing capability that isn't always guaranteed to work perfectly.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but
Right.
it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It's definitely something to track as these models mature and become more reliable in their interactions with other systems.
Yeah, because the reliability and how sophisticated these integration features are
Right.
is going to be really important for people actually using these models and adopting them in different industries.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about pure brain power here.
Okay.
How do these models stack up when it comes to general reasoning tasks?
Yeah.
Things like answering complex questions or just thinking things through logically.
This is where we start to see some real specializations emerge.
Interesting.
So the report positions Claude 3.7 Sonnet as a leader in AI reasoning,
Uh-huh.
particularly in areas like logical and deductive thinking.
Right.
Its ability to use this thing called chain of thought reasoning, where it breaks down complex problems into smaller steps,
Mm-hmm.
is a real advantage for tackling these intricate queries.
So if you're looking for an AI to really help with complex problem solving,
Right.
that's a key strength.
It is.
That chain of thought approach sounds really valuable
Yeah.
for those, multi-step challenging problems
Uh-huh.
where you need the AI to kind of show its work.
Yeah.
And the report even says it outperformed some of OpenAI's models in strategic reasoning.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's a pretty strong endorsement
Yeah.
for its logical capabilities.
But on the other hand, OpenAI's O1 model
Right.
was specifically designed with reasoning in mind.
Uh-huh.
They even built in more thinking time before it generates an answer,
Oh, wow.
which makes it really strong in areas like complex reasoning, scientific analysis, programming, logic.
Interesting.
It even outperforms GPT-4o in those specific domains.
So if you're dealing with these, technical and analytical problems,
Right.
O1 might be the best choice.
It could be.
And it sounds like O3 Mini builds on that foundation,
Yeah.
but with a focus on faster response times,
Right.
while still maintaining strong reasoning capabilities.
Especially in STEM fields.
Exactly. And expert evaluations have even suggested that O3 Mini gives more accurate and clear answers
Uh-huh.
with stronger underlying reasoning than its predecessor, O1 Mini.
Yeah. It's an improvement on all fronts.
And then you've got Grok 3, which also boasts strong general reasoning abilities,
Yeah.
understanding of context,
Uh-huh.
awareness of current information.
Right.
And it even has this special big brain mode
I love that.
designed for tackling those exceptionally difficult problems.
Yeah. And the benchmarks seem to support that.
Right.
Grok 3 is definitely a leader in certain reasoning tasks.
Big brain mode. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So it seems like while Claude 3.7 Sonnet is a very capable all-around reasoner,
Uh-huh.
OpenAI's O series and Grok 3 are specifically engineered and benchmarked for even higher levels of reasoning,
Yeah, they're really focusing on those areas.
particularly in STEM,
Uh-huh.
and a highly complex area. So depending on the type of reasoning you need,
Yeah.
you've got some specialized powerhouses to consider.
What's important is to really think about what are the cognitive demands of the tasks that you'll be using this AI for,
Right.
and try to match those up with what each model is best at.
Okay, let's get a little bit more technical for a minute.
Okay.
One term that kept coming up in the report was context length.
Right.
So what exactly does that mean?
Think of it like the AI's short-term memory.
Oh, okay.
It's basically the maximum amount of text it can process at one time.
Uh-huh.
And we measure this in something called tokens.
Tokens.
Yeah, and these tokens are essentially the building blocks of language for the AI.
Okay.
They can be whole words,
Uh-huh.
parts of words, even punctuation marks.
Uh-huh.
So the larger the token limit,
Right.
the more of your instructions and the surrounding text it can remember and process in a single interaction.
So it's like being able to feed it a longer document
Right.
or have a longer conversation
Yeah,
without the AI forgetting what you said at beginning.
exactly.
That sounds pretty important for complex tasks.
It is really important.
And the report includes this really helpful table comparing the context lengths of all these models.
Yeah, it's a great reference.
And what immediately jumps out is that Google's Gemini 2.0 models, both Flash and Pro,
Right.
have significantly larger context windows than the others.
Uh-huh.
Gemini 2.0 Pro boasts a whopping 2 million tokens.
Wow, 2 million.
That's a massive amount of information.
That's incredible.
It can handle at once.
Yeah.
The report says it could be the equivalent of hundreds of pages of text
Wow.
compared to GPT-4o's 128,000,
Right.
or even Claude 3.7 Sonnet's 200,000.
Uh-huh.
That's a really big difference.
Huge.
So if you're working with really large documents or need to have these, very long and detailed interactions,
Yeah.
that could be a big advantage.
It could give Gemini a real edge for things like summarizing lengthy reports.
Right.
Or having these really extended dialogues where you're remembering everything is crucial.
Yeah.
Or understanding instructions that are spread out over a lot of text.
But the report also reminds us that a longer context length doesn't always mean it's using all that context effectively.
Yeah, that's an important point.
And of course, processing more information generally takes more computing power.
Right.
And could lead to higher costs.
That's the trade-off.
Just because you can remember more doesn't mean you're always using all that memory perfectly.
Right. It's not just about quantity.
But still, for those information-heavy tasks,
Yeah.
having that significantly larger window could be a game changer
It really could.
in terms of what's possible.
Yeah, it's a key technical difference to keep in mind, depending on what you're doing with these models.
Now, the report also touches on the underlying architecture and the data these models are trained on. Were there any particularly interesting details there?
Definitely. So Claude 3.7 Sonnet, for instance, uses a sophisticated dual-path neural network architecture.
Wow.
And then the DeepSeek models leverage what's called a mixture of experts architecture.
Interesting.
It's kind of like the AI having different experts within its network,
Right.
each one specializing in a specific type of problem, which makes the whole system more efficient.
Yeah.
And then there's this general trend we're seeing towards training smaller, more efficient models on massive amounts of data.
Right.
Which is driven by the need for faster processing at lower costs.
Mixture of experts.
Yeah.
That sounds like a smart way to optimize performance.
It is really clever.
And the idea of smaller models learning from huge data sets aligns with this push for efficiency and speed that we're seeing across the field.
Yeah, everyone wants things to be faster and cheaper.
The report also highlights that OpenAI's o1 model was trained using a really novel algorithm, specifically designed to improve its reasoning capabilities.
Right, they're really trying to target that area.
And Grok 3 benefits from this continuously updated training dataset.
Oh, wow.
It even incorporates recent information directly from the internet and the X platform.
So it's staying up to date.
Which is a big advantage for staying current on, current events and information.
Huge advantage.
Up to the minute training data. That's incredible.
It is.
And with Grok 3 being trained on trillions of tokens,
wow,
the sheer scale of the data is just mind-boggling.
It is.
It really gives you a sense of the immense computational resources that go into creating these systems.
Yeah, they're really pushing the limits.
And while the specific architectural blueprints are often kept secret,
right, those are the trade secrets.
The report kind of hints at the underlying trends.
Yeah.
Advanced neural network designs and massive, carefully curated training datasets are really fundamental to pushing the boundaries of what AI can do.
They're the foundation of it all.
Okay, so we've looked at what these models can do and some of the tech behind them. But what about how reliable they are in the real world in practical use?
So the report looks at this by considering user feedback, those community discussions like the ones in the YouTube videos you shared.
Right.
And of course, those benchmark results.
Right.
So for example, Claude 3.7 Sonnet consistently does really well in coding benchmarks, which contributes to its reputation for reliability and software development.
Right.
And then the strong reasoning scores that we see with models like o103 and Grok 3 help to build confidence in how reliable they are for logical tasks.
So those benchmark scores aren't just abstract numbers.
Right.
They actually influence our perception of how these models perform when you're using them.
Yeah, they're not perfect, but they give us some indication.
But the report also brings up a really important point about the limitations of benchmarks themselves.
Right.
The potential biases they might have and the need for more transparency in how they're designed and used.
That's a good point. No single benchmark is perfect.
Right.
And a model that does great on one test might not do so well in a real-world scenario or on a different kind of task.
Right.
So real reliability
Yeah.
means consistent performance across a variety of situations.
Not just acing a particular test.
Exactly. And the report even points out that different benchmarks can sometimes lead to different rankings
Wow.
of how intelligent a model is.
So we need to look beyond just the scores
Yeah.
and consider the real-world context
Uh-huh.
and the specific things we're asking these models to do.
Yeah, what are you actually using it for?
The report even mentions that while ChatGPT is often seen as a versatile and generally accurate tool,
Uh-huh.
Perplexity AI is favored for its ability to give really fact-based answers,
Interesting.
and DeepSeek AI is noted for its cost-effectiveness.
So different tools for different needs?
So the perception of reliability really depends on what you as the user prioritize.
Exactly.
And safety is another critical aspect of reliability,
Absolutely.
with models like GPT-4 generally being recognized for their strengths in that area.
Yeah, they've done a good job there.
So it seems like there's no single undisputed champion when it comes to reliability.
Right.
It's more about finding the right model
Hmm.
for the specific job you need it to do.
And understanding both the strengths and weaknesses of each one.
Okay, let's move on to where we're actually seeing these advanced AI models being used in the real world.
Yeah,
The report gives some examples in both enterprise and public applications.
right?
And this gives us some insight into how these technologies might actually impact our own workflows or the products and services we use every day.
It's amazing to see how quickly these tools are being adopted. By large organizations,
Uh-huh.
Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is powered by AI,
Right.
is being used by a huge percentage of Fortune 500 companies
Wow.
for all sorts of everyday tasks.
It's really interesting to see specific models being chosen for very specialized applications.
Yeah.
I mean, the report highlighted Claude 3.7 Sonnet being used by Canva and Replit
Uh-huh.
for handling those real-world coding tasks,
Yeah.
right, in their development processes.
Yeah, they're really putting it to work.
And Amazon's Bedrock service gives users the flexibility to choose the AI model that best suits their needs,
Right.
with Claude 3.7 Sonnet being recommended for those advanced coding situations.
Yeah, it's becoming the go-to for that.
So it suggests that these models are finding their niches based on their strengths.
Absolutely.
We're also seeing a lot of these strategic partnerships forming,
Yeah.
with platforms like Slack, Notion, and Zoom integrating Anthropic's models into their services.
It's becoming more and more common.
And even companies in more traditional industries,
Right.
like GM and Figure AI, are collaborating with AI developers for applications in manufacturing and robotics.
It's not just software anymore.
Yeah, it's not just tech companies, it's really spreading.
Yeah.
This really underscores the broad impact of this technology
Uh-huh.
across different sectors of the economy.
Yeah, it's changing everything.
Absolutely. And the acquisition of MoveWorks by ServiceNow highlights this increasing adoption of AI-powered chatbots
Uh-huh.
for internal support within businesses,
Right.
which could really improve efficiency and those support experiences for employees.
Hopefully make things easier for everyone.
And beyond those enterprise applications, the report talks about how AI agents could simplify daily life for the general public,
Yeah.
which could lead to all sorts of new apps and services.
It's exciting to think about what's possible.
And within the corporate world, we're seeing applications of these models like Claude 3.7 Sonnet in things like marketing automation and finance.
Mm-hmm.
For tasks like ensuring compliance and analyzing documents.
Yeah, taking care of those really complex tasks.
It's amazing to think about how much time and effort these models could save
Yeah,
in those kind of routine and demanding tasks.
it could free up a lot of human brain power.
The report points out that OpenAI's O1 is really well suited for technical and research domains,
Yeah,
while Claude 3.5 Haiku is designed for those user-facing products where speed is really important.
right. So again, it depends on the application.
Yeah, the intended use really drives which model is the best fit.
Exactly. And Clock 3 is so versatile, it can be used in a lot of different areas, from analyzing code to processing real-time data to even automating business processes.
It's really impressive how much they can do.
And the overarching trend here is that these AI models are enabling organizations to be more agile, automate those routine tasks,
Uh-huh.
and make better, more informed decisions
Right.
across a huge range of industries.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface
We are.
of understanding the full potential
Yeah.
of all these applications.
It's both exciting and a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
The report even lists things like agricultural biology, healthcare transportation,
Wow.
as areas that are going to be transformed by this technology.
It's incredible to think about all the possibilities
Yes.
for the future.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the world of AI never stands still.
Right.
The report gives us a little sneak peek at some of the upcoming developments and announcements
Yeah, the things that are on the horizon,
that are going to shape this landscape even further.
it's moving so fast.
It is, the pace of innovation is just incredible.
It is.
We're expecting even more advanced and autonomous AI agents in the near future.
Yeah.
Google's launched Gemma 3,
Uh-huh.
And there are expectations for GPT-5 and Claude 4.
Right, even bigger and more capable models.
So the capabilities we've talked about today
Yeah,
are probably going to be surpassed pretty quickly.
most likely.
And Elon Musk's XAI just unveiled Grok 3
Yep,
with claims that it outperforms a lot of the competition.
right out of the gate.
And they've announced plans for a voice interface
Wow,
and a new search engine called Deep Search.
that's a big move.
That could really change how we access and interact with information.
It could.
And OpenAI's also released GPT 4.5
Uh-huh.
with improvements in language processing and better web search integration.
Yeah, they're not standing still.
And there's even talk about Grok 2 becoming open source,
Oh, wow.
which would really encourage wider adoption and experimentation.
That would be huge.
Plus, Anthropic is working on new features for Claude,
Uh-huh.
including a thinking mode
Interesting.
for more deliberate reasoning and its own web search capabilities.
And so they're getting in on that too.
Yeah, remember that Icy King video you sent?
Oh,
It
yeah.
was all about Claude getting web search.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
That's a big deal for keeping its knowledge base current and relevant.
Huge.
It's interesting to see how different models are approaching this need for up-to-date information.
Yeah, they're all trying to solve that problem in their own way.
And that FIOT3.gg video mentioned that GPT 4.5 arrived around the same time.
Uh-huh.
So it's really interesting to see these parallel developments happening
Right, everyone's moving at the same time.
across different labs.
Even Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has hinted at a potential return to more open source initiatives,
Wow.
which could have a big impact on how accessible these technologies are
Right.
for everybody.
That would be huge.
And NVIDIA's recent industry event showcased some amazing advancements in AI hardware,
Yeah.
which is going to give us the computing power we need to run these even more sophisticated models.
So it's a constant cycle.
It is.
New models, new features, new approaches to how these technologies are made available and how collaborative they are.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic landscape.
And it really emphasizes the idea that the best model today might be old news tomorrow.
Very true.
There's always something new and better on the horizon.
It's hard to keep up.
So you gotta be ready to adapt and learn constantly.